Trillions of aliens across the galaxy collectively gasped with shocked laughter as humanity launched its last desperate offense, the UES Dreadought. Admiral Peter Sullivan paced slowly and deliberately across the warship's bridge, his face illuminated only by the desperate blinking of SOS distress beacons on the main control panel. His mind weighed heavier than the tungsten armor plating fortifying humanity's final superweapon, knowing this was the species' last chance for survival against the sadistic Akamarians. The ruthless reptilians reveled in transmitting gruesome video feeds of their conquests across the stars. Genocide, planets cracked apart, billions suffocated in the vacuum, their homes shredded to atoms. Not even pleading children were spared, but brutally dismembered by the cackling invaders. World after world fell to the Empire's onslaught, and now the scaled exterminators turned their venomous eyes to Earth. The Galactic Council in its cowardice sat by and watched. A smug message from the bug-like Xandarins signaled they were ready to welcome the Akamarian dignitaries with a victory feast featuring freshly butchered human slaves. The Council would not intervene, sealing humanity's fate. They considered humans weak, primitive, and now a soon-to-be extinct species ideal only as cattle. Well, the livestock was about to bite back, hard. The UES Dreadought rumbled with the power of its classified weaponry, built in secret as a monstrous middle finger aimed at the galaxy. It would either save the human race or go down fighting with such righteous rage that the Akamarian Empire's charred survivors would whisper of their folly for millennia. Sergeant Jack Thompson, Sullivan's right-hand man, stomped over with trembling fists as he read the latest intel report aloud. "Sir, they're sailing straight for Earth now. A whole invasion fleet, 10 times our firepower." Sullivan gazed out the windows into the infinite black, his resolve turning to hardened steel. "Then it's now or never, Sergeant. We're going to hit them on their own turf, gut those scaled bastards from the inside out. Either the Dreadought turns their homeworld into a smouldering glass parking lot, or we paint it red with our blood and make them choke on it. Plot course for the Akamarian capital. Time to teach some fucking aliens what humans are made of." The UES Dreadought sliced through the fabric of space and time, its experimental fusion engines propelling the massive vessel at unfathomable speeds. Inside the armory, Marines hustled to gear up for the impending assault. They strapped on exoskeleton suits that amplified their strength and speed, transforming them into superhuman warriors. The suits hummed and whirred as the soldiers moved, testing out the enhanced capabilities. Next, they grabbed plasma rifles off the racks, the advanced weapons pulsing with barely contained energy. Portable force field generators were clipped to their belts, providing an extra layer of protection against enemy fire. In the bowels of the ship, Lieutenant Commander David Nakamura wiped sweat from his brow as he made final calibrations to the fusion drive. His team worked frantically, knowing that even the slightest mistake could spell disaster during the coming battle. Nakamura barked orders, his voice cutting through the hum of machinery. They couldn't afford any malfunctions, not with the fate of humanity resting on their shoulders. Suddenly, the ship's alarm screeched to life, red lights flashing throughout the corridors. An Akamarian scout ship had spotted them and was moving to intercept. Admiral Sullivan's voice crackled over the intercom, steady and unwavering. "All hands battle stations, I repeat, all hands to battle stations. This is not a drill." The crew scrambled to their posts, adrenaline pumping through their veins. The Dreadought dropped out of hyperspace, the inky void of space replacing the swirling vortex of the wormhole. The Akamarian vessel loomed before them, its insectoid hull glinting in the starlight. Without warning, the enemy ship opened fire, plasma cannons hurling bolts of superheated energy at the Dreadought. The human ship shuddered as the blasts impacted against its shields, but they held firm against the onslaught. The Dreadought returned fire, kinetic missiles and railgun rounds streaking across the void. The projectiles slammed into the Akamarian ship's shields, causing them to flicker and fail. Another volley of missiles found their mark, and the enemy vessel vanished in a blinding explosion, debris careening off into space. Cheers erupted throughout the Dreadought as the crew celebrated their victory, but Admiral Sullivan's face remained stoic. He knew this was merely a taste of what was to come, a small skirmish before the true battle began. The Akamarian homeworld loomed ahead, a foreboding presence that seemed to swallow the stars around it. Sullivan steeled himself for what lay ahead, knowing that the fate of the human race hinged on the outcome of this desperate mission. The UES Dreadnought burst from hyperspace, the Akamarian homeworld looming before them, a gleaming orb of towering cities and bristling defenses. Admiral Sullivan barked an order to engage the cloaking device. The ship shimmered and vanished from sight, invisible to the enemy's sensors. Sullivan nodded to the helmsman, and the Dreadnought descended into the planet's atmosphere, skimming silently over the alien metropolis below. In the drop pod bay, Sergeant Thompson and his team of Marines strapped themselves in, checking their weapons and gear one last time. The pod doors slammed shut, and the Marines braced themselves as the pods were launched from the ship, hurtling towards the surface. Anti-aircraft fire streaked past them, the Akamarians desperately trying to shoot down the invisible invaders, but the Marines' advanced stealth tech held, and the pods landed undetected on the outskirts of the heavily guarded command center. They fought their way into the heart of the command center, Akamarian bodies piling up in their wake. Thompson handed out explosive charges to his team, and they set to work, planting the bombs at key structural points. Corporal Lee hacked into an Akamarian computer terminal, his fingers flying over the alien keyboard as he downloaded vital intelligence. In orbit, the Dreadnought decloaked, its cover blown by a massive Akamarian battleship. The two behemoths traded blows, their shields flaring and crackling with each devastating impact. Sullivan gripped the armrests of his command chair, his face bathed in the red glow of warning lights as the bridge shook around him. But he refused to back down. The Dreadnought unleashed a final barrage of missiles, and the Akamarian ship shattered, its ruins spiraling down into the atmosphere. Thompson and his Marines fought their way back out of the command center, detonators clutched in their hands. They hit the triggers, and the charges exploded in a series of blinding flashes, the facility crumbling in on itself. The Marines sprinted towards the waiting dropship, their boots pounding against the rubble-strewn ground. A shadow fell over them, and Thompson looked up to see an Akamarian mech suit rising from the debris, its weapons trained on the Marines. The mech's pilot snarled, his voice amplified through external speakers. "Did you really think it would be that easy, hairless apes? You may have destroyed this command center, but you've only sealed your own doom." The mech took a thundering step forward, its arm cannons glowing with barely restrained energy. Sergeant Thompson barked orders over the din of plasma fire. "Take cover. Rodriguez, slag that mech." The Marines dove behind rubble as scorching plasma blasts chewed up the earth. Rodriguez hefted his railgun, sighting on the mech's exposed knee joint. The gun cracked like thunder. A hypersonic tungsten slug shattered the mech's armor, servos screeching as it lurched off balance. The squad surged from cover in a hail of plasma bolts and grenades. Explosions ripped gaping holes in the mech's hull, shredded circuitry sparking and spitting flames. With a final devastating salvo, the towering machine vanished in a firestorm of shrapnel. "Go, go, go!" Thompson waved the Marines towards the waiting dropship. Boots pounded up the ramp as the craft lifted off on screaming thrusters. Suddenly, a swarm of Akamarian fighters dove from the clouds, plasma cannons blazing. The dropship jinked and wove between skyscrapers as energy blasts pocked its armored hull. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Martinez gripped the flight stick with white knuckles, coaxing impossible maneuvers from the straining ship. "Hang on back there!" The city blurred past in a dizzying maze of glass and steel. Akamarian ships smashed into spires, raining molten debris. The dropship leapt from the skyline, clawing for open space. As Martinez angled towards the distant glint of the Dreadnought, a shadow fell across the view screen. An Akamarian battlecruiser loomed above, weapon ports glowing ominously. Aboard the Dreadnought, Admiral Sullivan clenched a fist. "Deploy fighter drones!" A swarm of knife-edged drones spilled from launch tubes, ion engines flaring blue as they screamed towards the enemy. The AI craft danced impossibly between plasma beams, their own guns spitting silver needles that pierced hulls and detonated reactors. The battlecruiser's guns fell silent under the onslaught, explosions marching across its hull. The dropship swept into the Dreadnought's waiting hangar, slamming to the deck in a shower of sparks. As the weary Marines stumbled down the ramp, Sullivan strode to meet Thompson, his face grim. "Earth is under attack. The Akamarian fleet just arrived in the solar system." Thompson squared his shoulders. "Then what are we waiting for, sir?" Sullivan pulled up a hologram of a massive orbital fortress. "We have a chance to cut off the head of the snake. The Akamarian Emperor himself is aboard that station." His gaze hardened. "I need you and your team to finish this, once and for all." Admiral Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he studied the holographic map of the Akamarian moon base. The intelligence was solid. The enemy's high command was there, directing the invasion of Earth. It was a chance to cut the head off the snake, to end this war once and for all. He turned to his bridge crew, his voice steady. "We're going in. Cloak the ship and set course for the moon. Sergeant Thompson, assemble your team. We're taking this fight to their doorstep." The Dreadnought shimmered and vanished, its cloaking field engulfing the massive vessel. It slipped through the void, a phantom stalking its prey. In the hangar bay, Admiral Sullivan stood before his assembled strike team, each soldier a hardened veteran of countless battles. "This is it," he said, his words echoing off the bulkheads. "We end this war today one way or another. We go in fast and hard, disable their command center, and force their surrender. Failure is not an option." The team nodded grimly, checking their weapons one final time. They boarded the waiting dropship, the craft's engines humming to life. The hangar doors yawned open, and the dropship rocketed into space, streaking towards the looming shape of the Akamarian moon. They touched down on the barren surface, the base's angular silhouette rising before them. Admiral Sullivan led the charge, his plasma rifle spitting blue fire as they breached the outer defenses. Alarms wailed, Akamarian soldiers boiling out to meet the intruders. The humans' cloaking field shimmered around them, rendering them nearly invisible. But the Akamarian elites were psionically gifted, their minds probing the shadows, sensing the presence of their foes. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the corridors, searing through armor and flesh. Soldiers on both sides fell, their blood staining the sterile white floors. Admiral Sullivan rallied his troops, his voice rising above the chaos. They pushed deeper into the base, cutting down Akamarian guards with ruthless efficiency. The Admiral's tactical genius shone through as he directed his team, outflanking enemy positions and seizing key choke points. At last, they stood before the command center's blast doors, the final barrier between them and their target. Breaching charges reduced the reinforced metal to molten slag, and the humans stormed inside, weapons leveled. The Akamarian supreme leader towered over them, his angular face twisted in a sneer. His personal guard fanned out, their psionic energy crackling in the air. The leader's voice was a rasping hiss, dripping with disdain. "Foolish primates," he spat. "You think you can challenge the might of the Akamarian Empire? We will grind your pitiful species beneath our heel." Admiral Sullivan smiled coldly, his finger hovering over the detonator in his hand. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." Realization dawned in the Supreme Leader's eyes as Sullivan spoke. "We've planted EMP charges throughout this base. One press of this button, and your precious technology will be nothing more than scrap metal. Your guards will be powerless, your command center crippled. So here's what's going to happen." Sullivan stepped forward, his gaze never wavering. "You're going to order your fleet to withdraw from Earth immediately. You're going to cease all aggression against humanity, and you're going to do it now, or I will turn this moon into your tomb." The Supreme Leader's face contorted with rage, but beneath it, a flicker of fear. His eyes darted to the detonator in Sullivan's hand, the human's thumb poised to press down. The seconds stretched into an eternity, the fate of two species hanging in the balance. Finally, the Akamarian leader's shoulders slumped, his voice a bitter rasp. "Very well, human, you have won this day. The fleet will withdraw." He turned to his guards, barking orders in his native tongue. The soldiers lowered their weapons, their faces twisted with barely contained fury. Admiral Sullivan kept his rifle trained on the Supreme Leader as he activated his comlink. Dreadnought, confirm the Akamarian fleet is retreating. A crackle of static, then the reply. Affirmative, Admiral, the enemy ships are pulling back from Earth. We've done it, sir. Sullivan allowed himself a small smile, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had prevailed. But even as the first flush of victory coursed through him, he knew their struggle was far from over. The Akamarians had been humbled but not broken. There would be other battles, other wars. But for now, Earth was safe, and that was enough. Sullivan turned to his team, his voice thick with emotion. Let's go home. Admiral Sullivan and his team sprinted through the sterile corridors of the Akamarian base, the Supreme Leader bound and stumbling between them. Plasma bolts sizzled past, searing the walls. The Akamarian guards pursued relentlessly, their psionic attacks battering at the humans' minds. Sergeant Thompson fired blindly over his shoulder, his rifle bucking in his hands. We need to move faster. Suddenly their comms crackled to life. Admiral Sullivan, this is the Dreadnought. A cloaked Akamarian Dreadnought just appeared from behind the moon. It's massive, sir. Preparing to engage. Sullivan cursed under his breath. The Supreme Leader wrenched free in that moment of distraction, his restraints snapping like twigs. He lunged at Sullivan, a snarl twisting his angular features. The two leaders crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, trading brutal blows. The Supreme Leader's claws raked across Sullivan's face, drawing blood. Sullivan retaliated with a hammer fist to the alien's throat, crushing his windpipe. The Akamarian guards closed in, their weapons leveled at the struggling humans. Thompson charged into their midst, his rifle blazing. He tackled the Supreme Leader, the two of them rolling across the blood-slicked floor. Sullivan staggered to his feet, snatching up a fallen plasma rifle. He and Thompson subdued the Supreme Leader once more, binding him with reinforced cuffs. They burst from the base, racing across the moon's barren surface towards the waiting dropship. The craft lifted off on howling thrusters, angling towards the distant Dreadnought. Aboard the human vessel, Lieutenant Commander Nakamura's fingers flew across his console, rerouting power from the damaged systems. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, its recently repaired sections sparking and smoking. Railgun charging, Nakamura reported, his voice taut. 60% and climbing. The Akamarian Dreadnought loomed on the view screen, its hull bristling with weapon batteries. Sullivan, now on the bridge, clenched his jaw. Bring us about, bearing 175, prepare for evasive maneuvers. The Dreadnought pivoted to face its foe, the railgun pulsing along its length. The Akamarian ship opened fire, a storm of plasma bursts and missiles. The human vessel jinked and wove, its shields flaring under the onslaught. Return fire, Sullivan barked. Target their weapon systems. The Dreadnought's own guns thundered in response, kinetic rounds and energy beams stabbing across the void. The larger ship shuddered under the impacts, its shields shimmering but holding. Nakamura's eyes widened as his scans revealed a critical detail. Admiral, I'm detecting fluctuations in their power core. It's overloading. Sullivan leaned forward in his command chair, his gaze intense. Then that's our target. Helm, bring us in close, divert all power to forward shields and the railgun. The Dreadnought surged forward, plasma blasts hammering its weakening defenses. Alarms blared across the bridge, red lights flashing in warning. The human ship closed the distance until the Akamarian Dreadnought filled the view screen, its hull looming like a mountain of metal. Railgun at maximum charge, Nakamura shouted over the chaos. Firing solution locked. Sullivan's voice rang out, cold and clear. Fire. The Dreadnought shuddered as the railgun unleashed its payload. A solid slug of depleted uranium accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. The projectile crossed the distance between the ships in a heartbeat, bypassing the Akamarian shields as if they weren't even there. It struck the Dreadnought's power core dead center. For a moment nothing happened. Then a brilliant white light blossomed from deep within the enemy ship, growing brighter and brighter until it consumed the entire vessel. The Akamarian dreadnought vanished in a titanic explosion, the shockwave buffeting the dreadnought and sending it tumbling end over end. Sullivan gripped the armrests of his chair, gritting his teeth as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. Gradually, the ship righted itself, debris from the destroyed dreadnought pattering against its hull. Sullivan allowed himself a small smile. They had done it. Against all odds, the dreadnought had emerged victorious. But even as the crew began to cheer, a new alarm sounded. Nakamura's face paled as he studied his readouts. "Admiral, the Supreme Leader, he's gone. He must have escaped in the chaos." Sullivan's smile faded, a cold knot forming in his gut. The Akamarian leader was loose on the ship, no doubt seeking revenge for his defeat. The battle might be won, but the war was far from over. Admiral Sullivan's voice rang out across the bridge. "Lieutenant Commander Nakamura, target their power core and charge the railgun to full capacity." Nakamura's fingers danced across his console, his brow furrowed in concentration as he fine-tuned the weapon's aim. The railgun hummed with power, its capacitors glowing an eerie blue as they strained to contain the immense energy. On the view screen, the Akamarian dreadnought loomed, its hull pitted and scarred from the battle. It maneuvered erratically, trying to shake the dreadnought's targeting lock. But Nakamura was relentless, his calculations adjusting for every twist and turn, the planet's gravity well and the minute fluctuations in the enemy's shields. "Railgun at maximum charge, Admiral," Nakamura reported, his voice tense. "Firing solution locked." Sullivan nodded, his gaze fixed on the Akamarian ship. "Fire!" The dreadnought shuddered as the railgun unleashed its payload, the projectile crossing the void in a heartbeat. It punched through the weakened shields and struck the dreadnought's power core dead center. For a moment nothing happened. Then the enemy ship blossomed into a miniature sun, the explosion tearing it apart from the inside out. Debris peppered the dreadnought's hull as the shockwave hit, sending the smaller ship tumbling end over end. The crew clung to their stations, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. Alarms blared and sparks flew from overloaded consoles. But Sullivan remained calm, his voice cutting through the chaos as he issued orders. Gradually the dreadnought righted itself, the last of the debris clattering against its battered hull. The bridge crew let out a ragged cheer, their faces lit by the fading glow of the destroyed dreadnought. But their celebration was short-lived. A transmission from the Akamarian homeworld crackled across the comms, the voice on the other end panicked and confused. "The Supreme Leader is captured? The dreadnought destroyed? What's happening?" More voices joined in, a cacophony of fear and anger. It seemed the destruction of the dreadnought and the loss of their leader had thrown the Akamarian Empire into disarray. Factions were vying for control, the fleet recalled to quell the growing unrest. Sullivan leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. This was their chance, a moment of vulnerability that could change the course of the war. He opened a channel to the Galactic Council. "This is Admiral Sullivan of the UES Dreadnought. The Akamarian Supreme Leader is in our custody, and their empire is in chaos. I propose an immediate ceasefire and the opening of peace negotiations, mediated by the Council." There was a long pause, the seconds stretching into eternity, then finally a response. "Admiral Sullivan, this is Councillor Zahn of the Galactic Council. We agree to your proposal. Proceed to Council headquarters at once. We will contact the Akamarian leadership and arrange for talks." Sullivan closed the channel and turned to his crew, his face a mask of determination. "Set course for the Council headquarters, and somebody get me a secure line to Earth. The President's going to want to hear about this." As the dreadnought leapt into hyperspace, Sullivan allowed himself a moment to reflect. So much had been sacrificed to reach this point, so many brave men and women lost. But they had proven that humanity would not go quietly into the night, that they would fight tooth and nail for their right to exist. And now, with the Akamarians in disarray, and the Council ready to talk, they had a real chance at peace. It wouldn't be easy, and there were sure to be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, Sullivan felt a glimmer of hope. The galaxy was changing, and humanity would be there to help shape its future. As the UES Dreadnought hurtled through hyperspace towards the Galactic Council's headquarters, Admiral Sullivan hunched over his desk, his eyes scanning a cryptic message on his datapad. The transmission, sent from an anonymous source, contained a trove of encrypted files that painted a disturbing picture, evidence of a conspiracy at the heart of the Council itself. Sullivan's brow furrowed as he pored over the documents, his mind racing. If the information was accurate, Councillor Zaxxon, a key figure in the upcoming peace negotiations, had been secretly funneling resources and intelligence to the Akamarian Empire. The implications were staggering. The talks were a trap, a ploy to lure humanity into a false sense of security while the Akamarians prepared their final offensive. The Admiral's jaw tightened. He couldn't afford to ignore the threat, but he couldn't tip his hand too soon. The Dreadnought was already approaching the Council's space station, its arrival expected. To turn back now would raise suspicions and potentially jeopardize any chance of exposing the truth. Sullivan's mind turned to Sergeant Thompson, the Marine who had proven himself time and again in the heat of battle. He was the perfect choice for a covert operation, a surgical strike to uncover the extent of Zaxxon's betrayal. "Thompson, I need a word." "We have a situation." Sullivan handed him the datapad, watching as Thompson's eyes widened with each swipe of the screen. "Zaxxon, I always thought there was something off about him, but this... I need you to put together a small team, the best of the best. Infiltrate Zaxxon's compound. Find anything you can to corroborate this intel. But keep it quiet. We can't afford to show our hand too early." Thompson nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "Understood, sir. I'll tap Rodriguez and Martinez. We'll get it done." As Thompson left to assemble his team, Sullivan turned his attention to the upcoming negotiations. He would have to play the diplomat to navigate the treacherous waters of galactic politics while his Marines worked to unravel the conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything they had fought for. As the Dreadnought docked with the Council's orbital station, Admiral Sullivan stood in the airlock, straightening his dress uniform. The fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar after months of wearing battle armor. He glanced over his shoulder at the small honor guard that would accompany him to the negotiations, their polished boots clicking against the deck. "Remember," Sullivan murmured, "we're here to talk peace, but stay on your guard. We don't know who we can trust." The airlock hissed open, revealing a contingent of Council security personnel waiting to escort them. Sullivan stepped forward, his face a mask of neutral diplomacy, even as his mind raced with the knowledge of Zaxxon's betrayal. In the Council chamber, the negotiations began in earnest. The Akamarian delegation, led by a battle-scarred general, sat opposite Sullivan and his team, their reptilian features inscrutable. The Council members, an assortment of alien species from across the galaxy, took their seats at the curved table, their robes a riot of color and texture. As the talks progressed, Sullivan found himself navigating a minefield of subtle insinuations and veiled threats. The Akamarian general was an adept negotiator, his forked tongue weaving a narrative of human aggression and expansionism. Some of the Council members nodded along, their sympathies clearly lying with the Akamarian Empire. Sullivan countered with hard facts, pointing to the unprovoked attacks on human colonies, the brutal atrocities committed by Akamarian forces. But he could see that his words were falling on deaf ears, the Council's opinion swayed by Zaxxon's influence. As the hours dragged on, Sullivan's frustration mounted. He could feel the tide turning against him, the Council's bias becoming more apparent with each passing moment. He needed Thompson to come through, to find the smoking gun that would expose Zaxxon's treachery and shift the balance of power. Under the cover of darkness, Sergeant Thompson and his team moved silently through the streets of the Council's capital city. Their unmarked shuttle had set down in a secluded alleyway, its cloaking device rendering it invisible to prying eyes. Thompson checked his wrist-mounted display, the schematics of Zaxxon's compound glowing in the dim light. The Councilor's residence was a fortress, ringed by high walls and patrolled by heavily armed guards. But Thompson had faced worse odds before, and he had a few tricks up his sleeve. With a series of hand signals, he directed his team to move out. They activated their personal cloaking devices, shimmering out of sight as they approached the compound's perimeter. Rodriguez, the team's tech specialist, made short work of the security systems, his fingers dancing over a holographic interface as he bypassed locks and disabled alarms. They slipped inside like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by sound-dampening boots. The compound was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one a potential hiding place for the evidence they sought. Thompson divided his team, sending them to search the most likely locations, while he made his way to Zaxxon's private office. The door was locked, but Thompson's suit was equipped with a molecular blade, a cutting tool that could slice through even the strongest alloys. He made short work of the lock, the door swinging open to reveal a spacious room dominated by a massive desk. Thompson moved quickly, his eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. He found a hidden safe behind a painting, its biometric lock no match for his suit's advanced decryption algorithms. Inside, he discovered a small data drive, its contents encrypted but promising. As he reached for the device, his calm crackled to life. It was Rodriguez, his voice tight with tension. "Boss, we've got company. Zaxxon's personal guard headed your way. They must have tripped a silent alarm." Thompson cursed under his breath, snatching the data drive and slipping it into a secure compartment on his suit. He readied his weapon, a sleek plasma rifle that hummed with barely contained energy. The door burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armed guards, their faces hidden behind opaque helmets. Thompson dove for cover as they opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. He returned fire, his shots precise and controlled, taking down 2 guards before they could react. But the guards kept coming, their numbers threatening to overwhelm the lone Marine. Thompson knew he needed to regroup with his team, to find a way out of the compound before they were cut off entirely. He activated his comm, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around him. "Rodriguez, Martinez, fall back to the extraction point. We've got what we came for, but we're about to have the whole damn compound on our asses." Acknowledgements crackled over the link as Thompson made his way out of the office, his rifle spitting plasma at anything that moved. He could hear the pounding of boots on the floors above and below him, Zaxxon's guards converging on his position. He reached the compound's central atrium, a soaring space of glass and steel. Rodriguez and Martinez were already there, their weapons trained on the entrances. Thompson joined them, his suit's sensors scanning for any sign of pursuit. But even as he spoke, the doors on all sides burst open, disgorging dozens of heavily armed guards. They formed a perimeter around the Marines, their weapons trained on the small group. Thompson and his team moved instinctively, taking up defensive positions as they prepared to fight their way out. But before they could open fire, a voice rang out across the atrium, amplified by hidden speakers. "Stand down, humans, you have nowhere to run." Thompson's eyes narrowed as he recognized the voice. It was Councillor Zaxxon himself, his tone dripping with smug satisfaction. The Marines exchanged glances, their faces grim. They were outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in the heart of enemy territory. But they were Marines, and they had a mission to complete. With a nod from Thompson, they opened fire, their plasma rifles cutting through the ranks of guards like a scythe through wheat. The atrium erupted into a maelstrom of energy blasts and screams, the air thick with the stench of ozone and burnt flesh. Thompson and his team fought with a savage efficiency, their weapons and suits working in perfect harmony. They moved as one, covering each other's blind spots and picking off targets with ruthless precision. But for every guard they cut down, 2 more seemed to take their place, an endless tide of enemies that threatened to overwhelm them. Rodriguez fell first, a plasma bolt catching him in the chest. His suit's shields flickered and died, and he crumpled to the ground, his rifle clattering from nerveless fingers. Martinez dragged him into cover, her face a mask of grim determination as she tried to staunch the flow of blood. Thompson knew they couldn't hold out much longer. They needed a way out, a desperate gamble that could turn the tide. His eyes fell on a large, ornate chandelier that hung from the center of the atrium's ceiling. It was a massive thing of crystal and metal, easily weighing several tons. With a shout to his team, Thompson aimed his rifle at the chandelier's supports, pouring plasma fire into the metal until it glowed white-hot. The chandelier shuddered and groaned, then fell from the ceiling with a deafening crash. It smashed into the atrium floor, sending guards flying and shattering into a million glittering shards. In the chaos, Thompson and Martinez hauled Rodriguez to his feet, half dragging, half carrying him towards the exit. They burst out of the compound, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads as they made a desperate break for their waiting shuttle. As they stumbled aboard, Thompson slammed his fist against the hatch controls, sealing the shuttle and collapsing into his seat. Martinez lay Rodriguez on the deck, her hands already working to stem the bleeding from his wound. Thompson pulled the data drive from his suit, staring at it with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. They had the evidence they needed, the proof of Zaxxon's treachery. But at what cost? He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. There would be time for recriminations later. For now, they had to get the data to Admiral Sullivan to blow the lid off the conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything they had fought for. As the shuttle lifted off, cloaking itself from view, Thompson allowed himself a small, grim smile. They had struck a blow against the enemy, but the war was far from over. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the real battle was just beginning. Plasma bolts seared the air as Sergeant Thompson and his team fought their way out of Councillor Zaxxon's compound. Corporal Rodriguez staggered, a sizzling hole in his armor. He collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Lieutenant Martinez laid down a blistering barrage of covering fire, plasma rifle flaring. "Go, I'll hold them off." Thompson half-dragged, half-carried Rodriguez through the chaos, rounds sparking off their shields. Martinez fell back, rolling under a hail of enemy fire. They burst into the compound's hangar, a sleek diplomatic shuttle waiting. Thompson heaved Rodriguez into the passenger seat, leaping into the pilot's chair. His hands flew over the controls. The shuttle lurched up on repulsors, blasting out of the hangar. Akamarian fighters streaked after them, cannons blazing. Thompson jinked and wove, the shuttle shuddering under near misses. Martinez, manning the shuttle's guns, sent lances of blue fire back at their pursuers. One fighter vanished in a fireball. Thompson pushed the engines to their limit, the council headquarters growing in the view screen. In the Grand Assembly Hall, Admiral Sullivan stood as his wrist computer pinged with an urgent message. His eyes hardened as he read Sergeant Thompson's report. The evidence of Zaxxon's treachery laid bare. He strode forward, his voice booming. "Councillor Zaxxon, you stand accused of conspiring with the Akamarian Empire against humanity. What do you have to say for yourself?" Zaxxon paled, his eyes darting to the exits. He bolted, shoving past shocked dignitaries. Council security rushed forward, tackling Zaxxon to the floor. He thrashed in their grip, spitting curses. The Akamarian delegation looked on in stunned silence, their leader's face a mask of disbelief. Sullivan pressed his advantage. "In light of this revelation, I demand an immediate ceasefire and a return to the negotiating table. The crimes of one councillor cannot be allowed to condemn our species to war." As the council erupted into heated debate, Sullivan's wrist computer chimed again. His heart sank as he read the message. "Admiral, it's Corporal Rodriguez. He's in critical condition. You need to get to the med bay now." Sullivan was torn, his duty to the negotiations warring with his loyalty to his crew. He caught the eye of his first officer, Commander Lee. "Commander, you have the con. I need to attend to an urgent matter on the Dreadnought." Sullivan raced through the corridors of the massive warship, his boots ringing on the deck. He burst into the med bay, stopping short at the sight of Corporal Rodriguez, lying pale and still on the operating table. The ship's doctor looked up, his face grim. "We're doing everything we can, Admiral, but his wounds are severe." Sullivan stepped forward, taking Rodriguez's hand in his own. The corporal's eyes fluttered open, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Admiral," he whispered, his voice weak, "did we get the data? Did we expose that traitor?" Sullivan nodded, his throat tight. "We did, son. Thanks to you and your team, your bravery may have just saved the human race. Rodriguez smiled faintly. Then it was worth it, sir. Promise me you'll finish what we started. Secure the peace. I will, Corporal. I swear it on my life. Sullivan bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. He stood there for a long moment, the weight of Rodriguez's sacrifice settling on his shoulders. Then he straightened, his jaw set with iron determination. He strode from the medbay, his steps purposeful. He had a promise to keep and a peace to win, no matter the cost. The doors to the assembly hall swung open with a boom. Admiral Sullivan strode through the grand halls of the Galactic Council, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. The negotiations had been grueling, weeks of tense discussions and hard-fought compromises. But finally, a fragile peace had been brokered between humanity and the Akamarian Empire. As he entered the council chamber, the assembled delegates rose to their feet, applauding his efforts. The Akamarian representative, a battle-hardened general named Zorthal, approached Sullivan and extended his hand. "You have proven yourself a worthy adversary and a skilled diplomat, Admiral Sullivan," Zorthal said, his voice a rumbling baritone. "The Akamarian Empire accepts the terms of the treaty, and we look forward to a new era of cooperation between our peoples." Sullivan shook the general's hand, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I am honored by your words, General Zorthal. Let us work together to build a brighter future for all." As the council session adjourned, Sullivan was swamped by well-wishes and congratulatory messages from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, still reeling from the revelation of Councillor Zaxxon's treachery, announced sweeping reforms to its internal structure, promising greater transparency and accountability. In recognition of his heroic efforts, Admiral Sullivan was appointed as Earth's ambassador to the galactic community. It was a role he accepted with a heavy heart, knowing that it meant leaving behind his beloved ship and crew. The UES Dreadought, badly damaged from the intense battles, was decommissioned and turned into a museum ship. Crowds flocked to see the legendary vessel, marveling at its advanced technology and the scars of countless battles. A memorial was erected in the heart of the museum, a solemn tribute to Corporal Rodriguez and the other fallen soldiers who had given their lives in defense of humanity. Sullivan stood before the memorial, his eyes tracing the names etched into the gleaming metal. "Your sacrifice will never be forgotten," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you I will make your dreams of peace a reality." As Sullivan threw himself into his new role as ambassador, he found that the memories of those he had lost never strayed far from his thoughts. Late at night, he would pore over reports and diplomatic briefs, driven by a fierce determination to forge a better future for humanity and the galaxy as a whole. But even as Sullivan worked tirelessly to maintain the fragile peace, trouble was brewing on the horizon. A group of extremist Akamarians, loyal to the old ways of conquest and domination, began a campaign of terror against human colonies and allied worlds. Bombs ripped through crowded marketplaces, leaving scores of innocent civilians dead and wounded. Trade ships were hijacked, their crews executed in cold blood. The extremists, led by a shadowy figure known only as the Scourge, demanded the annulment of the peace treaty and the resumption of hostilities against humanity. Sullivan, working closely with the Galactic Council and the reformed Akamarian leadership, launched a series of covert operations to dismantle the terrorist network. Elite teams of human and Akamarian special forces conducted daring raids on extremist strongholds, capturing key leaders and disrupting their supply lines. But despite their best efforts, the extremists always seemed to be one step ahead. Rumors began to circulate of a mole within the council, feeding information to the Scourge and his followers. As tensions reached a boiling point, the extremists launched a surprise attack on Earth itself. Swarms of sleek black ships descended from the skies, raining destruction on major cities and infrastructure. The planetary defense grid, still weakened from the previous war, struggled to repel the onslaught. Admiral Sullivan, recalled to active duty, led a hastily assembled fleet in defense of his homeworld. Aboard a new cutting-edge warship, he personally led the charge, his voice steady and unwavering as he issued orders to his crew. The battle was fierce and costly, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Sullivan's ship, the UES Retribution, took a direct hit to its bridge, killing several officers and leaving the admiral himself badly wounded. But even as blood streamed down his face and alarms blared around him, Sullivan refused to yield. He rallied his troops, inspiring them with his unwavering courage and determination. In a shocking twist, a new ship suddenly appeared amidst the chaos, its hull marked with the insignia of the Galactic Council. But as it opened fire on the human fleet, Sullivan realized with a sinking feeling that it was no ally. A transmission crackled across the comm channels, and a familiar voice filled the bridge of the Retribution. "Did you really think you could defeat me so easily, Admiral?" Counselor Zaxxon sneered, his face twisted with hatred. "I have been planning this moment for years, biding my time until I could strike at the heart of your pathetic species." Sullivan's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the arm of his command chair. Zaxxon, the mastermind behind the extremist movement, had escaped from custody and now sought to finish what he had started. "This ends now, Zaxxon," Sullivan roared, his voice filled with righteous fury. "I will not allow you to threaten my people any longer." The two ships clashed in a duel of titans, their weapons flaring with deadly energy. Sullivan's crew fought with skill and bravery, but Zaxxon's ship was a match for their own, its advanced technology making it a formidable foe. In a desperate gambit, Sullivan ordered the Retribution to ram Zaxxon's ship, the two vessels locking together in a twisted embrace of metal and sparking circuitry. Sullivan and a hand-picked team of Marines boarded the enemy ship, fighting their way through hordes of extremist soldiers. At last they reached the bridge where Zaxxon awaited them, a cruel smile on his lips. The counselor drew a wicked-looking energy blade, its edges crackling with dark power. "Come, Admiral," he taunted, beckoning Sullivan forward. "Let us end this once and for all." The two leaders clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, their weapons flashing and sparking with each blow. Zaxxon was a skilled combatant, his movements swift and precise, but Sullivan's years of training and experience made him a match for the treacherous counselor. In a moment of poetic justice, Sullivan saw an opening in Zaxxon's defenses, the same vulnerability that Sergeant Thompson had exploited to save his life during the mission on the Acamarian homeworld. With a roar of triumph, Sullivan struck, his blade finding its mark in Zaxxon's chest. The counselor stumbled back, a look of shock and disbelief on his face. He slumped to the floor, his life's blood pooling around him. Sullivan stood over his fallen foe, his face grim. "You underestimated the strength and resilience of the human spirit, Zaxxon. That was your downfall." With Zaxxon's death, the extremist fleet fell into disarray, their ships scattering and fleeing before the might of the human forces. Earth was saved, but the cost had been high. As Sullivan surveyed the wreckage of the battle, he felt a profound sense of loss and sorrow. So many lives had been lost, so much destruction wrought. The scars of the war would linger for generations, a constant reminder of the price of peace. But even in the midst of the devastation, Sullivan found reason to hope. The Galactic Council, chastened by the betrayal of one of its own, pledged its full support to the rebuilding efforts. The Acamarian Empire, too, offered its assistance, a gesture of goodwill and a sign of the new era of cooperation between their peoples. As the smoke cleared and the healing began, Admiral Sullivan knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but with the support of his allies and the hard-won wisdom gained through sacrifice and adversity, he was confident that humanity would endure. The legacy of the UES Dreadnought and its crew would live on, a shining example of courage, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. And Admiral Peter Sullivan, the hero who had led them through the darkest of times, would forever be remembered as a champion of peace and a guardian of the galaxy. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.